This is the third lecture on the topic of older adults. We ended the second lecture talking about physical changes in older adulthood, including chronic diseases and racial disparities and such. I want to pick up on this lecture and talk about some of the mental and behavioral changes and probably get into cognitive changes and probably get into some personality stuff. So some of the things that begin to happen during this stage of life is, okay, let me just start at the top here. You've got still the same pattern that we've seen pretty much throughout life is that women suffer from more depression than do men. But now we add to it some of the cognitive impairments, the term dementia, which refers to it's a generic term that refers to cognitive decline that begins to impair with age, that begins to impair our functioning in life. We see more of it over the course of life. I think I may have mentioned already, there's a great 60-minute story just last night that was talking about specifically Alzheimer's and some of the new research that's being done on dementia. And once upon a time, it was, so you can't diagnose Alzheimer's up until quite recently until until after death by using an autopsy. What distinguishes dementia from, Alzheimer's from other kinds of dementia is really the progressive state of it. And in order to get an Alzheimer's diagnosis, they'll identify something called plaques and tangles, which effectively, at a very simplified understanding of what Alzheimer's is it's the brain, the neurons have kind of begun to fall apart. And as they fall apart and dissolve, they've created these kind of clusters of Dow is the tangles, and I forget what the plaques, but it impairs or makes it impossible for the signal to communicate back and forth. And because some of the symptoms of just across the board dementia are similar to Alzheimer's, the diagnosis is often incorrect or imprecise. So there's this one story with this gentleman, and all of the people in the story are over the age of 90, and they thought for sure when he was living that he had Alzheimer's, but when they sliced his brain, he actually had no signs of Alzheimer's at all. He did not have any of these particular proteins. On the other hand, there was a gentleman who showed no signs of dementia, but when he donated his brain after his death, he did have plaques and tangles. So this is sort of cutting edge stuff, and I'm not going to pretend to I'm not going to pretend to know the distinctions between them, but know that there's a lot of work being done. It's a very real life impairing quality of life issue facing aging adults. And because there are so many people who are reaching this stage in life, and it's so common once we get to certain stages, when we get towards the end of our life, that this is a serious issue for healthcare providers and for families. So Parkinson's disease, so Alzheimer's is considered the most common degenerative condition. Parkinson's is considered the second most common degenerative condition. With Parkinson's also comes physical impairments like tremors and inability to it impairs physical functioning before Alzheimer's does, right? Both of them are degenerates. One word, degenerative. One word that I think I mentioned before is this one right here called cognitive reserve. Hang on a second, I want to see if I actually talked about it. I don't remember if I used that exact phrase in a previous slide. I just want to see now because I'm curious. I don't know if I use cognitive reserve or not, but this is the, so a good friend of mine was a faculty member in philosophy, and once he retired, it appeared as if his dementia was a onset very quickly, is what I'm trying to say. Right after he retired, it appeared that he got dementia very quickly. And there was a lot of talk amongst the people that cared about him that probably wasn't what happened at all. But because he was still engaged in work, in his cognitive work, that the symptoms of the dementia were not as obvious. So that's something referred to as cognitive reserve. And it's the idea that, especially if you are in a cognitively demanding occupation, that because you are still using all of your cognitive resources, you're able to compensate. So when this philosophy professor lost his keys or was forgetful, everyone just chalked it up to, you know, well, he's a philosophy professor, he's living in his own head, and it's as if that you can excuse your or justify or make up for. You have other ways of explaining these gradual cognitive impairments. So once he retired, it became very clear, you know, very quickly, that he was suffering from dementia. And it wasn't as if it set on all of a sudden. It was that he'd used up, if you will, his cognitive reserve. So people who are engaged in cognitive activities can kind of pass, is basically what I'm trying to say. While I was looking for images to put in the slideshow, just to make it more interesting, I ran across this this one. I just thought I'd stick it in for more for interest. But it is an illustration of some of the signs of early symptoms or early signs of Alzheimer's disease. And of course, some of these things just kind of come with age, and we could also chalk them up to a distracted living or stress. I think the key is that they all are present kind of at the same time. You have mood changes, vision changes, lapses in judgment, all of these things. And again, it's according to the story I saw last night, there are some new methods for assessing if Alzheimer's, if it is Alzheimer's or not. But once upon a time, the only way you could know for sure was through a slicing or a biopsy of the brain. Some of the things we know about cognitive changes, just like with sexuality, it's use it or lose it. If you stare at a TV all the time, if you don't read, it will sort of inhibit your cognitive changes. So there's also some indication that the cognitive changes will be delayed depending on one's education or what's called cognitively complex work. In other words, if you do a lot of reading or puzzle solving in your work, this is what I was talking about before. It creates that, if you will, cognitive reserve, right? We start to see that older people lose their what we call novel problem solving. I'm pretty sure we've talked about this when we were talking about younger adults, and suggested that young adults are really, really good at solving new and novel problems. But as we get older, so older people can't maybe not be able to figure out that new remote control on the TV. They'll get frustrated because that's a new novel problem, but they're pretty good at figuring out interpersonal problem solving. So it's as if this is where I think we get this assumption or this sort of perspective that old people are wise and worldly because they've had more lived experiences. They've interacted with more people. Obviously, they're going to be better at solving interpersonal problems than somebody who has had fewer interpersonal experiences to draw on. But so they're less good at new things, but they're better, or they're better at these interpersonal things, this sort of wisdom. What's called slower at switching attention, which is basically what reaction time is. I think we've already talked about this when we were talking about balance and coordination, that they can't, because remember, from a psychological perspective, you really can't multitask. What you're really doing is just shifting your attention back very quickly. And this is harder as we get older. There's also really interesting changes or some observations, and I've bolded it here because it's going to show up a couple more times, about what happens to older people's moods. And as we age, old people basically mellow out. There's some indication that older people report fewer negative moods. They're less, also when we talk about the personality development, and more positive moods. So they become, I know there's a stereotype that old people are grumpy, but that's not what the data says at all. And then I just wanted to stick this one in there, that there was a brief reference to that IQ at the age of 50 appears to have a correlation with timing of death. It was a very brief reference to it, so I don't really know what to make of that one. We've talked about memory, I think, in some of the other chapters, but it was also referenced here that what the data shows us in terms of older people is that the sensory memory, that's the memory that is processing, you know, sounds and images. There doesn't seem to be any change in that, but there is some delay or some decline in working memory. And working memory is when we take all of our memories, all of the long term and the sensory memory, and we put all of that together in the short term and we try to use it. And this may result in our inability, or this may result in when older people have a hard time with speech, because a conversation really uses a tremendous amount of memory resources. It uses sensory memory to put together the sounds you just said. It uses short-term memory to remember what you said at the beginning of the conversation, the beginning of the sentence. It uses long-term memory to remember my relationship with you and what I know about you. So a conversation with somebody uses a lot of memory, and this may be where we start to see memory impairments with older people. Episodic memory, so those are what we would put in the short-term memory category. Long-term memory is thought as the memories that are there, like, you know, for a long, long time. We have episodic memory, and those are memories about your life, the episodes of your day. So it may be more difficult for a person to remember what they did last week. Those are the episodes of their life. But see, here's another thing, is at this point you have so many hundreds of episodic memories that you may simply be getting them confused. There's no reference exactly to the explanations, but these are just the patterns that are discussed in your textbook. Semantic memory is the stuff that you know. It doesn't appear to be any decline in changes in what you know. Procedural memory refers to things that you can do, like ride a bike. There's no evidence that you forget how to do things. You don't forget how to change a tire. You don't forget how to ride a bike, but there does seem to be some difficulty in learning new procedures. So basically forming new procedural memory, like learning how to, that would make sense, right? So learning how to hook up a computer would be a new procedural memory. And then, of course, what kind of memory is impaired and later in life is going to be predicted by where in the brain, in the event that there's some damage or if there's some atrophy. It's going to depend on where in the brain that atrophy and damage is. And I am going to stop this lecture right here and carry on with the next one.